Okay, we're continuing on Shcharuch Rachaim, Siman Samech Aleph, and we are up to Seif Chaf Gimel. Maran writes, and this is really the Rambam that Maran is paskening here. Sarich ledaktek shelo yarpeh chazak v'lo yachazek harafeh. Not only you have to read correctly, part of reading correctly is not to make something that's rafeh chazak or vice versa. If the pronunciation calls for a strong stress on a certain word, on a certain letter, that's how you should do it. For instance, the chazak and rafeh could be fei and pei, right? Fei and pei, you think it's like, actually the Paro is really the name, right? It's not Paro in the reading of the Chumash. Or ritzpa, you think it doesn't make a difference. Sometimes it actually doesn't make a difference. It's just a matter of correctness. Sometimes it could make a difference in the meaning. I've mentioned this once before. When you read Megillah is upon us coming up, you have in the very beginning of the Megillah, it says al risefat bahar v'dar v'shesh v'dar v'socharet, and risefat means risfa means the floor, right? Which is what over there is referring to, a reference to the marbles and the beautiful, amazing, fantastic flooring that they had in the palace of Achashverosh. But if you say rispa with a pei, it didn't change much. He just was mechazek et harafeh. Like Shcharuch says here, you should not make the rafeh chazak. But there changes the entire meaning. Ritzpa means hot coal, right? Ubeyado ritzpa. It's a completely different word, right? So you could get into trouble like that, or even putting the stress in the wrong syllabus. If you have it has to be milera milera. For instance, you have Rachel ba'a imason or ba'a imason. Both of them actually exist, right? Both of them exist. In the same parasha, within a few psukim, when they tell Yaakov Avinu, they say, oh, Lavan, you ask about Lavan. Lavan is good. And his daughter, Rachel, right? Ba'ai Mason is going to soon come with the flock, the sheep of Lavan. And then a few psukim later, it says, Rachel Ba'a. She already came. So it completely changes the meaning, right? And you have when it's betem, so on and so forth. You have sometimes that the shvanach could make a difference in the pronunciation. So basic grammar rules are important in order to daven a proper tefillah. And therefore, says Maran, says Rambam, pay attention to say the tefillah properly with proper pronunciation of the words. Of course, goes with this, the pronunciation of letters that Rafeh and Chazak are different. For instance, Gimel and Gimel. The Gimel Rufuya, which many people don't have the Mesorah. I remember the old, back in East, in the old country, the people had the Mesorah, all the Syrians, all the Iraqis, all the Persians. They had this thing, they would say Magen Avraham. You'd never hear Magen Avraham. It's not Gimel. It's not a gay Degusha, it's Gimel Rufuya. Or Megillat Esther. Hagala. People say Hagala. Because it's Gimel Rufuya. I'm just proving to you because these are words you've heard from the elders. So you see that people were careful in pronunciation of the proper words in the proper way. Same is with Dalet and Dalet Rufuya, which is much more lost nowadays than what it was before. And of course, it applies to Mapik Hey, which is completely different. Mapik Hey, so if you have a dot inside the Hey at the end, that is to be pronounced as a Hey at the end, which most of the time actually changes the meaning, right? Parashat Nedarim, for instance, Isha means a woman. Isha means her husband. You see how different it is? It's the same Aleph Shin Hey, right? But one of them means a woman, and one of them means her husband, Isha. right? Yekimenu ve'isha yeferenu. So if you say isha yeferenu means completely means something else, even if you make grammatically is completely incorrect the sentence to read it like that. But these are just a few examples of the details. If you go through Tefillah together and through the Chumash together, you'll have literally hundreds and hundreds of examples of this changing the meaning. But Maran is saying, even if it doesn't change the meaning, a Tefillah uttered properly is the way to go, right? You need to know the basics. You don't have to have the actual Hebrew grammar is actually very could be confusing. It's certainly tedious and deep. Books and books written on Hebrew grammar. You don't need to know all of those things. Of course, if you know those things, you will understand much better, and you could by yourself and without having a book with the nekudot, you could come up with all how it should be read based on grammar rules and so on. But you don't need to have that. At least, when you're reading with the nekudot and everything, should be careful. So says the Shulchan Aruch, velo yaniach hanach velo yanid et hanach. You should not make shavanach, shavanach. When you have shva could be sometimes nach, shva could be sometimes nach. Sometimes the shva is not read as a slight a, and sometimes is read as slight a. So that really depends on what you have beforehand. If it's a Tanakh Gedolah, it's a Tanakh Tanah. Again, it gets into the basic rules of grammar. If you don't want to get to that, you could get one of those sidurim that actually have done it for you, and they differentiate in the way the shvanach and shavana or kamatz gadol and kamatz katan are written. For instance, in this sidur that I have over here, they have done it. So, you have every shva na that is written a little bit larger or a little bit different over here, and every kamatz gadol is written a little bit differently. So even if you don't know all of the rules and regulations of the grammar, you can at least just pay attention to the sidur, and you'll know the proper way of reading it, because they have differentiated between them the way it's printed, the way it's written in the sidur, right? So that is one way of doing it. If you don't want, here it says you have like a mesameh elev, even though that's a shva, it's a shvana. So it's written differently over here, right? And so on and so forth. Mishpatei Hashem, so those are all the ones that have dagesh inside. It's one of the rules of shvana. There's a number of rules that make a shva from nach to na to be actually pronounced a, and you can learn all of them in one day. It's like it needs a basic class, basic shiur on Hebrew grammar reading. But nevertheless, this is one of those things that the person should seek a teacher and properly learn it. And meanwhile, they could use one of those sidurim that do all the job for you, and they stop where it should be stopped. They show you signs here separate between this word and that word. This one is shvana, this one is kamatz gadol, and all those things are actually mentioned in the sidur. So you can use one of those sidurim until you learn the rules on your own. Says the Mishna Berurah, Hanach sheva nechtifet nikra nach. It just talks about shvanach, shvana. If you have a sheva at the end of a word, that would become shvana, nach. Says the Mishna Berurah, or a sheva that comes after a word that has tenuah ketana on it, and sheva nad nikra hamitnoah k'mo berosh teva. If it's in the beginning of the word, you have sheva, you read it a little slight or be'emtza teva haba'a achar tenuah gedolah, or if it's even in the middle of the teva, but it's coming after a letter that has tenuah gedolah on it. Siman tenuah gedolah pituchei chotam, right? Pituchei chotam, chirik, right? Cholam, all those things, or serei, all of those are considered Tenuah gedolah, rak chirik sheyesh yud etzla. But chirik it has to be with the yud. It's considered tenuah gedolah. When it doesn't have a yud next to it, it's considered the tenuah ketana. Okay, again, this is for a shiur that is more focused on these laws of grammar. It says, by the way, the Kaf HaChaim says that the nekudot of the otiyot were given from Moshe Sinai. So it's very important to be mindful. And if you want to already get into Kabbalistic realm, the kedusha of otiyot, you have the otiyot, you have the tagim, you have the nekudot, and you have the ta'amim. And the more they are written, the less holy they are. So contrary to your imagination, the least holy is the actual ot in the Sefer Torah, the actual letter. Then the tagim, the crowns, are more holy than the ot. The nekudot that are not written are more holy than that, and the ta'amim are the holiest, which actually brings us to the next Seif of Shulchan Aruch as well, based on the Gemara in Psachim. Next Seif in Shulchan Aruch says, Sarich likrot kriyat shema b'te'amim. You must read kriyat shema with its ta'amim, with the tropes that are to be read with the Torah. Should read kriyat shema b'te'amim, not just read the words in Hebrew, but say them with the tropes, right? Kemo she'em b'Torah, just like it's in the Torah. Therefore, if you pay attention, you'll see that when they have the Kriyat Shema in the Sephardi Sidurim, you'll have, even though that in other places you don't have it, by Kriyat Shema, you have all the ta'amim on it, is because of, in this Sidur, for instance, I'm looking at, it doesn't have it by the other ones necessarily, but when it comes to Kriyat Shema, it has all the ta'amim of the Torah. It's because of this Seif in Shulchan Aruch, you should be reading it. Now, you'll wonder to yourself, why is it that we haven't seen it so far? Those who grew up within the Ashkenazi communities have not necessarily seen it because of the Ramah over here. The Ramah says, in our country is not the minhag to do that, says the Ramah. But even in our countries, the people who are medakdek and they're careful, they are mahmir to do it. Like the Shulchan Aruch says, as we mentioned before, this is from Rabbeinu Yonah in the beginning of Masechet Brachot, Daf Chet Amud Bet, which really is sourced in the Gemara in Masechet Pesachim. Okay, says the Mishna Berurah, but still, even according to Ashkenazi minhag, that they're not careful with the tropes. Still, you should be careful to pause where it should be paused, and not to just mash up everything together. It still has to be a certain level of obedience, basically by the tropes that they guide you where to pause, where not to pause, and so on and so forth. Now, on this, the Kaf HaChaim says that you must, for Sfaradim, even though that the Ramah exists, it says the Sfaradim must go with Maran. The halacha is like Maran Shulchan Aruch, they should do it with the ta'amim, and he says the minhag of majority of the kilo that the Sfaradim is also to follow Maran Shulchan Aruch, and he says you should be especially very careful with the ta'amim, with the tropes that they pause, because sometimes where you pause in a sentence makes all the difference in how the meaning of it will come around. So therefore, you should be extra careful in that, and not to cause the meaning of the wording of the pasuk to change. Mordechai Eliyahu also says that you should read it with the tropes, but he says that if it becomes so difficult for you that you lose train of thought, and now you can't even think of what you're saying because you're too careful and anxious about saying it, the Tamir says, okay, fine, don't say it if it means losing the kavanah. But even that person, little by little, when you do a few psukim, you get used to reading the ta'amim. Little by little, you get used to saying it properly. So that's something that could be developed over time. Now, the example of what Mishna Berurah says that you have to pause in the right place is brought in Kaf HaChaim. This is you have in Parashat Tzitzit, the last parasha of Shema. Say Ani Hashem Elokechem, Asher Hoseti Etchem Eretz Mitzrayim, right? So it says Sarich Lizaher Ulafsik La'achar Tevat Ani, Shken Tevat Ani B'li Hafsaka Sholelet Behechreach Ed Acherim, which you find it says Ana Hashem Ki Ani Avdecha, right? Which Ani over there Lo Ba'al Lishlol Acherim. When כשיש הפסקה לאחריה, היא שוללת אחרים. When he pause, then it says only me and nothing else. And therefore, when you say Ani and you pause, then you say Hashem Elokechem, you have the right mashma'ud that Hashem is saying, I am doing it. I'm the one who took you out of Mitzrayim, nobody else. Right? When you say Ana Hashem ki ani avdecha, you read it together, I am part of your avadim, one of them, and one of your servants, not the only one, right? But when you say Ani, and you pause and say Hashem Elokechem means only I took you out of Mitzrayim. There was no other powers, no other sources, and so on and so forth. So it's a subtle difference, says the Kaf HaChaim. But that little thing, which perhaps most of us here did not know until now, is a subtlety, but at the same time important, as the Kaf HaChaim mentions. So again, a lot to be said about this. We need to move on. So you leave it up to the Kahal here. Be careful. As Sidurim, pick up the proper Sidur, hire the proper person to teach you the basics of the grammar, and that would be serving you well in the years to come. Says the Shulchan Aruch Seif Chaf Hei, כשיאמר וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, when you say וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, ימשמש בתפילין של יד. As you say Shema, and you come to the mitzvah of tefillin, וקשרתם, right, that you should tie them on your hand, you touch the tefillin shel yad, you kiss it, touch the tefillin shel rosh, you kiss it, as the Shulchan Aruch says, ושאמר וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, ימשמש בתפילין של יד, וכשיאמר והיו לכתובות בין עיניך, ימשמש בתפילין של ראש, וכשיאמר וראיתם אותו, ימשמש בציצית שלפניו. Now, you pay attention, you see that Maharan does not say you have to kiss it, just as you touch it. Similar to this, you have in Hilchot Mezuzah, the first Siman in Hilchot Mezuzah, when you come by, you see it, the Ramah says you touch the Mezuzah. The fact that people kiss it and they have their third finger to kiss, that is coming from Maran Chida B'Shem Ariya Kadosh. You show chibuk mitzvah, you're showing how beloved the mitzvah is for you. But for mindfulness, which is the din, the halakha that the Ramah brings over there for mezuzah, or the halakha that Maran is bringing over here for tefillin and tzitzit, is the mindfulness that matters. And for mindfulness, you don't need to kiss it, right? Just touch it to be mindful and aware. You don't have to necessarily kiss it. This is a COVID-related halakha, and then you don't want to germ yourself out. That's something to be mindful of. Someone they actually asked me, so like, Rabbi, when you have masks in the thing, how do you kiss you? I was like, you don't have to kiss it. I don't necessarily touch it. You don't have to necessarily kiss it. As long as you could put up with the N95 masks, you don't have to take them off for actually kissing your fingers. It says the Mishna Berurah, twice in Shema. You have it in the beginning, you have it in the second parasha also, that you mentioned the inyan of tefillin. So in both of them, you kiss you touch your tefillin. So it says the Kaf HaChaim that when you touch your tefillin, you shouldn't do it like mitzvah anashim menumada. At some point, the person becomes robotic. It becomes something out of rote that you do automatically when he's saying Shema. He could be saying Shema completely mindlessly, And as soon as the hand goes to touch and the kiss, you're on an autopilot. You're not, and that's not a good thing. Says the Kaf HaChaim, it should mean something to you. That's a beautiful Rambam by Chod Mezuzah. You have this like sparks of inspiration in the Rambam sometimes, even though that's a Sefer of Halacha. I think it's in Chod Mezuzah, if I'm not mistaken, Perek Vav, Halacha Vav. I don't remember exactly. But as you can check it for yourself, it gives an insight into mezuzah. It says every time you pass a doorpost and there is mezuzah there, you look at it and you remind yourself that everything, just like you passing from one domain to another, from one place to another place, everything in this world passes. Nothing stays. Nothing stays. Your status, your age, your power, your wealth, your life passes you by, and the only thing that stays is what it says in this clef on the wall. Your relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Achdut HaShem, that's the only thing that stays. The only wealth that you take with you is how much you connect with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the message of mezuzah. Every time you pass a domain, the life is a passage, right? Just like passing from one domain to another. It's a beautiful thing. But how many of us, when we pass every door, we come inside and say, oh, gee, the world is passing, and let me connect that. Unfortunately, not a whole lot of people. But that's what's supposed to be. Every time you pass a mezuzah, you're supposed to pause and ponder for one moment that let me not focus on the wrong things. Let me refocus my attention to the right things in the world. So the same as with tefillin, right? When you put on tefillin, what are you doing? You're taking the parasha of Shema, which is acceptance of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's yoke, of Him being the king, us being the servants, and the yoke of mitzvot, that us committing ourselves and our lives and our efforts and our wealth of knowledge and find everything that we have, dedicating it to doing the mitzvot. And then, of course, the parasha of Tzitzit, the third parasha. So we have that in the tefillin. We put it on our hands, which is what our doing, it's all with the hands. And it's in front of your heart. That commands your emotions. When you get excited about, your heartbeat goes up. You get sad about, your heartbeat goes down. It's the center of emotions, right? What your passion and your goals are in life. And of course, you put it here in the frontal cortex, or the memories and the thought process, the command center of the body, my mind, my thought process, my excitement, my heart and my feelings, and my doing power, all of it is dedicated to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's what tefillin is. Really, we had this earlier on in tefillin. Seif Yud Maran said this. But how many people put on tefillin, they pause for 2 seconds to think about that? Or when you touch it and you kiss it. It's supposed to be, but we don't do it. And we don't do it is because of this. Kaf HaChaim says, be aware. It's going to become a mitzvah anashim l'umada. It's going to become a robotic, mechanical, autopilot thing. So be aware of it. Here and there, maybe when you want to put on tefillin, pause for 2 seconds and think, I'm trying to put a stamp on myself today. Stamp of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, a seal of Achdut of Hashem. That few seconds could actually direct the person and change their view of how they live a life. Important Kaf HaChaim to have in mind. Last Seif of the Shulchan Aruch over here talks about Yesh Narkim Likrot Kriyat Shema Bekol Ram. There are those who read Kriyat Shema with a loud voice. Yesh Nohakim Likroto Belachash, and there are those who read it with a lower tone, lower voice. Right? Still, as we mentioned before, you should hear yourself lachatchila at the very least. You should hear yourself. Right? When you say Shema. But the first pasuk you should say the Kol Ram v'chen nohagim. You should say it loud, and that is the minhag. Says the Chafetz Chaim, can you have somebody else say Shema? You listen, and you'll fulfill your obligation by listening to somebody else. It says, take a look at the Magen Avraham, Pri Mekadim. The majority of the poskim hold that you are yotzeh with listening to somebody else, says the Chavetz Chaim Mishna Berurah. And it's better than just thinking it, because, in other words, if you think Kriyat Shema, you're not yotzeh. If you sit there and in your mind saying Shema, you're not yotzeh. He didn't say it. So if I hear you saying it, why is that better than here? Who says the Mishna Berurah? Of course it's better, because there's a concept shomea ke'oneh. When you listen, you have kavanah. He has kavanah. It's as if I am saying the words. It says better than hirhur, because hirhur is not like saying it, but listening to somebody that says it for me is like saying it. This that we say you could be yotzeh, you could fulfill your obligation, is only when you actually understand what is being said. You understand Lashon HaKodesh. If you don't understand Hebrew, it's heebie-jeebie for you. You don't understand what he's saying, then you're not going to fulfill your obligation if you don't say it. If you say it, fine, you at least said it. But you only fulfill your obligation by listening to somebody else when you understand the words that are being uttered and you have in mind and he has in mind. Those are basic elements that you're required to have. Maran Rab Chaim and Beneshni in Knesset Gdolah, he writes, B'Shem Birkat Avraham, the Dafka B'Yachid HaMotzi HaYachid. That's only when one individual is trying to fulfill the obligation for another one. So there's Reuben and Shimon. Reuben is trying to say it for him and for Shimon. But if you're in a tzibur, so Reuben is not just saying it for Shimon, but Reuben is saying it for a whole kahal of at least a minyan of 10 people, then says the She'arei Knesset Gdolah in the name of Birkat Avraham is different. Aval Yachid HaMotzi Et HaRabim, when you have a Yachid that is being motzi a whole tzibur, or one person saying Birkat HaMazon for two other people, not just for one, is Zimun. Afilu enam mevinim b'Lashon HaKodesh yotzim. He says even if they don't understand Lashon HaKodesh, they still could be yotzim with that. Now, on that note, the Kaf Chaim says that the minhag is that every person in the tzibur should say Shema for themselves, right? You should say it b'kol ram, and you should say it together, right? So this is the minhag of the Sfaradim, right? The Ashkenazim, everyone is quiet, and then all of a sudden the shach says Hashem Elokechem Emet, and then they go on. By Sfaradim, there's a whole, it's like Shut Machane Yehuda. You have everybody is saying it for themselves, and that's the minhag of the Sfaradim, which Kaf Chaim also brings that's the Chatchila, the way to do it. The Kaf Chaim says this that we mentioned, the Mishna Berurah of one person having in mind for other people, and you could be yotzeh with shomea ke'oneh. The Kaf Chaim says you should be mahmir that shomea ke'oneh doesn't work by Kriyat Shema, and therefore he says you should say it yourself. You should say it if you know how to read. You certainly should be saying Kriyat Shema yourself, and you're not yotzeh by just listening to somebody else. So that's something to be mindful of as well. And Bezrat Hashem will continue in the upcoming Simanim in the days to come.